The passing of my grandfather left behind more than just property. It left a war zone. I expected the conflict to come from greedy relatives or distant aunts circling for a piece of the pie. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Hello everyone. Each story shared on this channel aims to uplift, inform, and celebrate our wonderful audience. Here at Tales by Aunt Mia, we bring you narratives that truly resonate. Before we go further, remember to like this video to show your support. Leave a comment, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Now back to our story. The real battle came from the two people I once called Mom and Dad. The very ones who had walked away the moment I became a burden. At the reading of the will, they sat like royalty, poised, self-assured, already dividing the riches in their minds. My father's arm was slung over the chair, as if he already owned it. My mother's diamond-studded hand rested gracefully on the table, perfectly still. Then the lawyer turned the page, and their smiles didn't just fade, they soured. That instant, the flash of shock in their eyes, the clench of my father's jaw, my mother's sharp gasp, is permanently etched into my memory. Because that day, they lost more than money. They lost their control. My name is Isla Hallstrom. I was 23 when my grandfather died and willed everything to me. His property, his fortune, his entire legacy. But the story doesn't start or end there. It begins with a lie. A picture-perfect family. And a girl they tried to erase. From the outside, my life seemed enchanted. I grew up behind wrought iron gates and sculpted hedges, in a house where every window glowed after dark and imported cars filled the driveway. People thought I was fortunate. Private education, ski trips to the Alps, closets filled with designer clothes organized by color. But what everyone saw was only the surface. Inside, the house was cold in a way no furnace could ever fix. Love wasn't offered freely. It was negotiated. Earned through top marks, impeccable behavior, and staying quiet when it counted. My parents, Vincent and Marissa Hallstrom, valued appearance above everything. To them, affection was transactional, traded, never given. If a moment wasn't worthy of a magazine spread, it wasn't worth having. I remember standing at the edge of my school's soccer field once, watching my friends run toward parents who cheered and applauded. And I remember the silence that met me. No one clapped for me. No one was waiting, because a trophy child doesn't need love. She only needs to perform. And perform I did, so brightly that I began to burn up. But no one noticed. Or if they did, they chose to ignore it. I held on to hope far longer than was reasonable. Even at 18, I still believed something might shift. That my parents would finally see me not as an ornament or a reflection of their success, but as their daughter. When I was accepted into university, I imagined them feeling proud. I pictured my mother embracing me, my father making a toast at dinner. I thought this might finally make me worthy of their love. Instead, they sat me down beneath the dining room chandelier, in a room that felt more like a museum than a home. "You're on your own now," my father stated, sipping his wine. "Time to stand on your own feet." My mother didn't even look at me. "We've given you enough. Life isn't a free ride, Isla." They called it a lesson in independence. I called it abandonment. I packed my life into 2 suitcases while the scent of my mother's perfume hung in the hall. Neither of them walked me to the door. That night, I sat on the floor of a rundown apartment I could hardly afford, eating instant noodles and wondering how love could disappear so completely. The only one who never let me go was my grandfather, Elias Hallstrom. He didn't live behind gated estates or attend glittering parties. His home stood at the edge of town, ivy climbing the brick walls, floorboards that creaked like they were telling secrets. He never made big speeches or tried to solve my problems. But when I turned up at his door, drained and hollow, he brought me inside and made tea. Sunday dinners with him became everything. The aroma of roasted garlic and herbs filled his small kitchen. For a few hours each week, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to earn affection. I was just Isla, his granddaughter. He'd listen to me vent about double shifts at the diner, or shoes with holes in them. He'd nod and tell me, "You're doing better than you know." He never wrote me checks, but he gave me confidence. He said I was strong. And for the first time, I started to believe it might be true. I had no idea then that he was quietly building something behind the scenes. something that would one day shield me from a storm I never saw coming. When Elias died, it felt like the last light had gone out. The call came on a Tuesday. Gray skies hung heavy outside, and rain tapped the window like a slow, steady clock. He was 82, still sharp, still sturdy, but his heart had carried too much for too long. I sat on the edge of my uneven bed in that tiny apartment, the voice on the phone saying, "He passed peacefully." Peaceful. But nothing in that moment felt peaceful. The funeral was a haze of black umbrellas and stiff handshakes from people who'd never sat at his table. I stood alone near the casket, watching strangers mourn a man they'd only known from a distance. Then came the will. I expected a few mementos, a book, an old photograph. But what Elias left me wasn't small. It was everything. Land, bank accounts, investments, a legacy worth nearly $4 million. And with it, one final sentence that stole my breath. This is for Isla. For Isla alone. Even from beyond, he had drawn a line in permanent ink. And my parents were on the wrong side of it. I arrived at the lawyer's office in the only formal dress I owned. Simple black cotton, a little faded but clean and pressed. I brushed my hair and tied it back, trying not to feel small walking through those glass doors. They were already there. Vincent in a crisp navy suit, his tie knotted perfectly. Marissa in dove gray, pearls around her neck, lipstick immaculate. They looked like royalty seated at that polished mahogany table. Calm, collected, sure of themselves. They didn't acknowledge me. Not until the lawyer, Miss Thorne, entered with a leather-bound folder under her arm. Then my mother smiled. "Isla," she said, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "So glad you could join us." She said my name like a word she hadn't used in years. I nodded, my throat tight, and took the seat farthest from them. The reading began with the standard formalities. Legal terms, names, dates. My parents listened with relaxed assurance, already dividing the estate in their minds. But when Miss Thorne turned the page, her voice didn't hesitate. "To my granddaughter, Isla Hallstrom, I leave the entirety of my estate." Just like that, their masks began to slip. I thought I'd heard wrong. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of paper as Miss Thorne continued. Her tone was even, detached, but the words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My father's face changed first. His confident smirk tightened into something hollow. My mother blinked quickly, her lips parting slightly before pressing into a thin line. They didn't speak at first. Then, almost together, they switched tactics. "Sweetheart," Vincent said, his voice suddenly soft. "This is a lot to take on. But don't worry, we'll help you manage it." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table like a kindly king. My mother's hand fluttered toward mine, her manicured fingers hovering above the wood. "Of course, darling. We'll make sure it's all handled properly." I just stared. These were the same people who hadn't called me in years, who had turned away without a second thought. And now they wanted back in. Not because they cared, but because money was involved, and they refused to believe it wasn't meant for them. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. But Miss Thorne wasn't done. She cleared her throat, a small, intentional sound that cut through my parents' performance. "If I may continue," she said, her gaze shifting toward them. Her tone was firm now, precise. "There are additional instructions from Mr. Elias Hallstrom regarding the management of the estate." The room grew tense. Vincent adjusted his tie, his gold cufflink glinting. My mother's fingers curled slightly. Her smile was trembling at the edges. Miss Thorne turned the page and read clearly. "Under no circumstances are Vincent or Marissa Hallstrom to manage, oversee, or control any portion of the estate left to Isla Hallstrom." My heart seemed to stop. She went on, undisturbed by the tension across the table. "Should either party attempt to manipulate, pressure, or interfere with Isla or the inheritance in any way, they will forfeit all rights to the secondary trust established in their name." Silence fell like a heavy blanket. This wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was law. My grandfather had drawn a line and built a barrier behind it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vincent spoke, his voice rougher now, the polished charm cracking. "That can't be right," he said, partly to the lawyer, partly to himself. "Elias wouldn't." "He didn't mean," he trailed off, hearing how desperate he sounded. My mother's hands clenched in her lap, her perfect composure crumbling. She turned her sharp gaze toward me. Not the sweet, concerned look from moments before, but something cold. Calculating. There must be some mistake, she insisted. Elias would never disinherit his own children completely. There is no mistake, Miss Thorne replied, sliding the document toward them. It's all properly signed, notarized and witnessed. He was very clear. My mother's smile vanished completely. She didn't try to reach for me again. She just stared, hard and unblinking. I'd seen that look before, when I was younger and didn't comply quickly enough. But this time it didn't land. Because now I wasn't standing alone. Now I had something they couldn't take. A protection built not from wealth, but from love, written in unchangeable ink. And for the first time in years I felt unshakable. They hadn't just lost the money. They'd lost their control. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. That wasn't their style. Vincent leaned back, jaw tight, staring at the will as if he could change the words through force of will. My mother gazed ahead with a quiet fury. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. I stayed still, my own hands pressed together under the table to keep them from shaking. But inside, something solid was taking root. Elias had known. He had known what they would try. He had foreseen the charm, the pressure, the subtle manipulations disguised as care. And he made certain I would never have to yield to any of it again. That night, I walked out of the law office alone. My parents didn't say a word to me. They didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. Back in my apartment, I stood in the doorway, greeted by the familiar creak of the floor. I looked around at the peeling paint, the noisy heater, the chipped mug on the counter. And for the first time I didn't feel small. I felt chosen. The quiet didn't last. A week after the reading, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved in years. I stared until the screen went dark. Then it rang again. Vincent. When I finally answered, his voice was calm. Too calm. Smooth, like a prepared speech. Isla, he said, as if we spoke every day. We only want what's best for you. This isn't about the money. It's about family. You shouldn't have to handle this alone. I let him talk. Let him rewrite history with that voice. The same one that told me to pack my bags and find my own way when I was barely 18. He called it strength. He called it love. But I remembered crying in a diner bathroom, my apron stained with coffee, my hands raw from carrying heavy trays. That strength didn't come from them. It came in spite of them. When guilt didn't work, they switched to nostalgia. My mother emailed me a photo, me at 5 years old, smiling next to a birthday cake I hadn't helped make. Let's be a family again, she wrote. But families don't discard you like trash. And I wasn't going back. I didn't answer the email. I didn't return the calls or reply to the carefully crafted messages. At first, they stayed polite. But I knew it wouldn't last. The next voicemail was different. Vincent's voice, once honey smooth, was tight and clipped. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't know what you're doing. You aren't ready for this kind of responsibility. And then the word slipped out. The one he hadn't used in years. Ungrateful. It hit like a slap. Not because it was new, but because it was so familiar. That had always been their weapon of choice. Not yelling. Not violence. But guilt. Dressed in fine clothes and contempt, wearing a smile. But this time it didn't land. This time I didn't bend. I saved the message. I filed it away. Then the letters started arriving. Formal envelopes with gold-embossed return addresses. Inside, polite suggestions posed as legal advice. Offers to relieve me of the burden. To help navigate the complexities of wealth management. And under every paragraph, the unspoken message. Hand it over. Let us control you again. I didn't open the last one. I just dropped it into a box with the others. Proof. They were still trying. But so was I. Then they showed up. Not in a courtroom. Not through attorneys. In person. I came home from work one evening to find their car parked across the street. Sleek, expensive, completely out of place on the cracked pavement beside rusty mailboxes. My mother was behind the wheel, sunglasses on even though the sun had set. My father stood near the hood, arms crossed, wearing the same navy coat he wore to every business dinner and gala. I didn't stop walking. My keys were already in my hand. I kept my head down, heart racing. Isla, my father called. Just 5 minutes. That's all we're asking. But I wasn't that girl begging at the dinner table anymore. I slipped through the side entrance, locked the door behind me, and stood in the hallway until my breathing slowed. Later, I watched from my window as they waited. 30 minutes. 40. Then they left. The next day, a neighbor asked if I was okay. Said the couple had looked out of place. Too polished for a neighborhood with laundry lines and broken fences. Do they know where you live? She asked. Yes, I said. But not for much longer. I contacted Ms. Thorne the next morning. Her office was quiet. A world of dark wood and steel. And she greeted me like she'd been expecting my call. She didn't flinch when I told her about the calls, the letters, the car outside my building. She just nodded, pen already in hand. Keep everything, she said. Every voicemail, every email, every visit. Document it all, date, time, location. We're going to build a wall so high they'll never reach you. And that's when I stopped being afraid. I became watchful. Every word they sent me was printed and filed. Every unexpected visit was logged. Every conversation recorded. Every envelope saved. It felt strange, turning love into evidence, family into a case file. But it was necessary. Because this wasn't about bitterness. It was about survival. About not letting them twist their way back into the center of my life. They thought I was naive. They thought I'd break under pressure like I used to. But they hadn't counted on Elias. They hadn't counted on the fire he'd lit in me. And now that it was burning, I wasn't going to let it go out. Not for them. Not for anyone. Weeks passed. Then one night, just after dark, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but I saw the name on the screen, Judith Thorne. I picked up. They crossed a line, she said. I waited silently. Your parents tried to access one of the financial accounts, she continued. They used outdated documents. Illegally. My stomach dropped, not in fear, but in a strange, weightless relief. They'd finally done it. They'd stopped pretending. Do we press charges? I asked. My voice didn't shake. Judith paused only for a moment. We will pursue legal action. Elias anticipated this. Everything is prepared. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea, sat on the floor by the window, and looked out at the quiet street. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about burning the scripts they had written for me since I was born. The dutiful daughter, the quiet girl, the expendable burden. And if they thought they could fight their way back with fake papers and empty smiles, they had misjudged one final thing. I wasn't the same girl they had thrown away. I was the one Elias believed in. And I was ready to fight. The lawsuit moved quickly. Judith didn't delay. She filed motion after motion, each one layered with evidence, recorded voicemails, printed emails, letters, and sworn statements. Every attempt to pressure, mislead, or intimidate me was laid out in black and white. We weren't just telling the truth. We were building it, piece by piece. My parents had always believed perception was reality. That if they smiled widely enough and dressed well enough, they could shape the world to their will. But in court, illusions don't work. Paper does. Facts do. I didn't gloat. I didn't call them to scream or demand answers. I let the silence speak for me. They had trained me well in that. How to keep my face neutral, my feelings hidden. Now I turned it back on them. No outbursts. No threats. Just proof. Every time they twisted the truth, we untangled it with something stronger. And for the first time they couldn't silence me. They couldn't control the story because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was defending. And I had truth on my side. The kind of truth that doesn't need to yell to be heard. It just stands solid and unbreakable. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in feeling, like the air was holding its breath. I sat beside Judith at the plaintiff's table. Hands folded, posture straight. I wore a black blazer I'd borrowed from a friend, and shoes that were slightly too small. Across from me, my parents looked as flawless as ever. Vincent in a custom navy suit, wearing the same smug expression he used in negotiations. My mother in soft lavender silk, a strand of pearls around her neck, her hair perfectly styled. They didn't look anxious. They looked bored. To them, this was just another performance. When the session began, Vincent stood first. His voice was calm, with just the right hint of emotion to appeal to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "my daughter is young. She's overwhelmed. We only wanted to help her manage what she's not prepared to handle." My mother dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. "She misunderstands us," she whispered. "We acted out of love. Out of concern." Their lies were polished to a high shine. But what they didn't know was that we had the receipts. And Judith was only getting started. She rose slowly, not rushed, not flustered, just steady, like the truth itself. "With the court's permission," she said, "I'd like to submit evidence that contradicts the defendant's claims of concern and goodwill." The judge nodded. Judith turned to the table and opened the first file. "Exhibit A," she stated clearly. "A voicemail from Vincent Hallstrom, left at 8:13 p.m., 6 weeks ago." She pressed play. Vincent's voice filled the room, smooth at first, then cracking into anger. "You don't deserve this, Isla. That money isn't yours. You'll ruin everything." Whispers rustled through the gallery. Judith didn't pause. She submitted printed emails next. My mother's words sickly sweet on the surface, but layered with guilt and subtle threats. More voicemails followed, each one another piece of the mask peeling away. Then came the forged account documents, hard proof of their attempts to gain access despite the will's explicit instructions. I didn't look at my parents, but I felt the shift. The courtroom, once filled with their charm and control, was now anchored in reality. The truth wasn't emotional. It was undeniable. And suddenly, their confidence began to shrink. In silence. In front of everyone. By the time the last document was presented, the room had changed. The judge's expression was no longer neutral. It had hardened, etched with clarity and disappointment. Vincent sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. My mother looked smaller somehow, her tissue crumpled and forgotten in her lap. Then the judge spoke. "After reviewing the evidence," he said, his voice steady and firm, "it is clear the defendants acted with intent to manipulate and access an estate they were legally barred from. Their behavior constitutes harassment, fraud, and breach of trust." He didn't hesitate. "I hereby rule that Vincent and Marissa Hallstrom forfeit all claims to the secondary trust established in their name by Mr. Elias Hallstrom. They are to pay penalties for attempted fraud, and are barred from contacting Isla Hallstrom in any capacity. A restraining order. Fines. Legal separation." It was over. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. And as my parents gathered their papers with unsteady hands and left the courtroom, I watched the performance end. No bows. No applause. Just silence. And me, finally free in it. The estate stood at the end of a gravel drive, lined with trees that remembered me. I hadn't been back since Elias's funeral. But now, keys in hand, I crossed the threshold not as a guest or a shadow, but as the owner of all he had left behind. Dust drifted in shafts of light cutting through the tall windows. The air smelled of cedar and old books, exactly as it always had. Time had moved gently here, respectfully. I walked slowly through each room. The dining table where we'd shared Sunday dinners. The scuffed floorboards he'd refused to repair because they had character. The crooked photo frame still hanging in the hallway. Then the study, his favorite room. I paused in the doorway, half expecting to see him there, book in hand, glasses perched on his nose, humming some half-remembered tune. But it was just the armchair now. Empty. His presence still lived there, woven into the fabric of the seat, imprinted in the coffee ring on the desk. I didn't move anything. This wasn't a room to redecorate. It was a memory to preserve. And I wasn't just preserving him. I was rebuilding myself. The next morning, I bought hydrangeas, blue and white, like the ones Elias used to plant along the porch. I remembered him kneeling in the dirt, humming, sleeves rolled up, soil under his nails. He'd said flowers needed love to bloom properly. I wasn't much of a gardener, but I dug anyway. Bare hands, sore palms. The earth was tough in places, soft in others. I didn't mind. I placed each plant into the ground like I was writing a thank you note he'd never read. With every flower I planted, I felt something release in me. Not pain, not grief, just space. Space where control and fear used to live. I stayed out there all day, dirt on my jeans, my hair tied back with a pencil. The house behind me didn't feel imposing anymore. It felt like it was welcoming me. By evening, the porch smelled of greenery and memory. I sat on the steps, arms around my knees, watching the light catch the petals. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was something quieter. A peace that was earned, not given. And it was mine to keep. The nights were different now. Not silent, exactly, but softer. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from loneliness, but from peace. I sat on the porch most evenings, knees tucked up, a cup of tea cooling beside me. The hydrangeas swayed in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a cicada sang into the dusk. Inside, nothing had changed. Elias's books still lined the shelves. His boots still sat by the back door, worn and scuffed. I'd left everything where it was. Not because I was afraid to move forward, but because it felt right. This house wasn't a museum. It was a legacy, built not on money but on intention. He'd given me more than property, more than protection. He gave me the chance to begin again without asking for permission. My parents were gone from my life now, by law, and more importantly, by choice. I didn't miss them. I missed what might have been, but not what was. They taught me how to survive. But Elias taught me how to live. And now, finally, I was doing exactly that. On my own terms, in my own home, under my own name. Sometimes I still hear them, not in voice or footsteps, but in memory. The way Vincent used to say responsibility, like it was a punishment. The way my mother's silence could freeze a room. They're ghosts now. Not gone, but powerless. And that's what quieted them. I once thought cutting them off would feel like revenge, like fire, like victory. But instead, it felt like setting down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. There's no satisfaction in watching someone drown in a tide they made themselves. Only distance. Some days I wonder what they say about me now. If they still tell their version of the story at charity events or over wine with their cold-hearted friends. She's ungrateful. She took what was ours. Let them talk. Their words have no power here. Not in this house. Not in this life. This land, these walls, this quiet. They all carry Elias's voice instead. And his was the only one that ever truly mattered. He gave me more than they ever could. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. And that choice changed everything. I keep a framed photo of Elias on the mantle. Not from a formal portrait or a news article, but one I took myself. He's sitting on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, laughing at something I'd said. His eyes are squinting in the sun, a half-finished cup of coffee beside him, sleeves rolled up like always. That's how I remember him. Not as a man with a fortune. Not as the owner of land or assets. But as the only person who ever looked at me and truly saw me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make grand gestures. He just stayed. When everyone else walked away, Elias stayed. And now he's still here. In the grooves of the wood floors, in the creak of the front gate. In the way the wind moves through the trees at night. His love wasn't performative. It wasn't loud. It was steadfast. Enduring. When he died, I thought I had lost everything. But really, he had given me everything I needed to finally begin. Not just freedom from my parents, but freedom to choose who I was, what I wanted, where I was headed. That was the real inheritance. And I'll never let it go. One evening, as the sky deepened to that rich indigo just before the stars appear, I sat on the porch with Elias's old mug in my hand. The hydrangeas swayed gently in the breeze, in full bloom now, whispering secrets to the wind. The house behind me glowed warm and golden through the windows, lived in. Mine. And I whispered into the night. Thank you. My voice trembled, but it carried. Because this wasn't just the end of a fight. It wasn't about money or courtrooms or bloodlines. It was about finally being seen. Elias gave me more than a second chance. He gave me myself. He showed me that love doesn't always come in grand declarations. Sometimes it's found in eggs cooked in a cast-iron skillet. In a voice that never forgets to call. In a chair worn soft from years of listening. This life I'm living now, it's quiet. It's imperfect. It's not what they would have chosen for me. But it's mine. And for the first time, I don't owe anyone an apology for that. So was I right to cut them out? Yes. Because sometimes walking away isn't about anger. It's about choosing peace and holding on to it, no matter what.